Of course, as you know, I'm reviewing today. We're not lecturing today. I'm kind of reviewing over some of the material that we had before, which I think most of our view material is going to be on the, it's going to be like 3 topics today, which of course I'll go through, which our exam will have, which will be prehistory, ancient Mesopotamia, and then of course ancient Egypt that I'm going to have. So that's going to be our topics today. We'll go over. I should have some announcements that you'll see if you go to Canvas later, but I should have an announcement about the online final exam, which will be posted today. It'll be, I think, up by 10 a.m. this morning, February 8th, of course, Monday. And of course, it will give you directions and all that, but just kind of go through it real quick here about the directions, of course, right now for the review. Hey, Chris, morning. But first of all, of course, don't forget, you do get 2 attempts on this exam. So don't forget about that. I do give more than one, like the quizzes, of course. It is timed. So 40 minutes per quiz or assignment attempt. 30 multiple choice, 10 matching. It's pretty much, you got 40 questions on it, on this assignment. And then looks like it's divided pretty much between like Mesopotamia and Egypt. There will be 17 questions each. Prehistory will only have 6. So obviously those are going to be the 2 topics that you want to study the most, which is Mesopotamia and of course Egypt. Some students have also asked me about like the Persians and Persian Empire, Venetians, I think and Israelites. Those will not be on the exam. I'll have a quiz later on that section, which I'm going to be probably lecturing later in the week on Wednesday. So anyway, who else we got here? Oh, Jillian, good morning. It's like Jillian's there. Chris also is on StreamYard. By the way, if anybody wants to join me in StreamYard, you can. I think I gave you the link already to it if you want to, of course, join me. So anyway, yeah, I'm going to go, of course, like I said, go into this study guide. I have kind of made a PowerPoint version of it to show you, which a lot of these have been like actually in the part of the lectures. You've probably seen these, which I decided to go ahead and just review it all at the same time over each section. So our first section we got, of course, to cover on, of course, is the section on prehistory. That's, of course, a short section, more or less. So looks like the first question, of course, is like, what is, of course, prehistory? Prehistory is the historical period before, like, written records, civilization, which I think I told you starts about 3,000 to 4,000 BC. Good morning, Matthew. I hope you're doing great out there. So we're kind of going over the study guide questions. So that's prehistory. What are examples of early humans or hominids that developed in Africa, Eurasia, and the Americas? There's a bunch of these you need to, of course, study about and go over and research, of course, through your notes from last time. But I talked about Australopithecus being one of the oldest, which was different versions of that early hominin, of course. The first was southern ape man, Australopithecus. The most famous one you'll need to know about, of course, is Lucy, of course, discovered by Donald Johanson, of course, in Northeast Africa. And I think I talked about that one from last time, found in 1974. And that was the one, of course, that was associated with a Beatles song. You remember, they named it after that Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky of Diamonds. So they consider that one to be one of the first humans that kind of broke away from other primates. And they think humans are somehow descended from, of course, Australopithecus. Homo habilis, I think I talked about that other early human, which Louis Leakey was one of the first that found some of the early Homo habilis fossils in Africa, in Ethiopia, Tanzania, etc. They found some. And Homo habilis means either skilled man or handy man, because he was one of the first humans to use like tools, like pebble choppers, I think I talked about previously as well. So we talked about that early human. Then we talked about Homo erectus, which I told you meant upright man or also erect man. And Homo erectus was considered to be one of the first important humans because he was the one that, you remember, was the first major hunter-gatherer, like hunting for animals, big game hunter. And he was also the first to leave Africa. He spread into like Europe and Asia, lived as far back as 2 million years ago, Homo erectus. I think I told you how Richard Leakey found one of the most famous Homo erectus fossils, Turkana boy, which I talked about before. I think I may have also talked about those other ones like Java man, Peking man. I think were some other fossils that they found also as well. So Homo erectus was one that, was the first to use like the stone hand axe, fire, spear, things like that. Then we talked about the Neanderthal man, Homo neanderthalensis. That was, of course, the really first Homo sapien that you hear about, thinking man or wise man. And he developed about 300,000 years ago in Africa and then spread to the rest, like into mostly southwestern Asia and Europe as a whole. Neanderthal man was mostly a big game hunter. He was the one that was famous for his huge cranium and those heavy brow ridges across the eye sockets. And he competed with other humans like they think Cro-Magnon man, but Cro-Magnon man they think drove them to extinction. We had talked about that previously before. And then I talked about Cro-Magnon man being like the first major Homo sapien culture that develops mostly in Europe and part of Asia. And that one becomes the most widespread culture that'll spread, throughout the world. Homo sapien, which is, modern man that we're related to. Let's see. Then we talked about what two major cultural stages that man developed in right here. Of course, was the Stone Age, and then you had the Metal Ages. The Stone Age was divided into, if you remember correctly, the Paleolithic Age, or Old Stone Age, the Mesolithic Age, or Middle Stone Age, and then the New Stone Age. And then, and of course, it means also Neolithic as well. Metal Ages, of course, Copper Age, they had a Bronze Age, and then they had an Iron Age. Wouldn't worry about dates, but there might be some questions where you might have to have a chronological order on some of those historical subperiods. What type of cultures does man rely on to survive during the Paleolithic Age or Old Stone Age? Predominantly, humans were like a nomadic culture, hunting and gathering. So it's a hunter-gatherer culture was the main thing that we survived on in the Old Stone Age, which was like around 1 million years or so. What type of climate declined during the Mesolithic or Middle Stone Age? They think the Ice Age began to recede, and there's kind of a transitional period where humans begin to go towards farming, from hunting and gathering to farming over time. What current geological epoch began around 10,000 years ago or so? That was the Holocene epoch. The Holocene epoch is the current epoch we're in right now, geological epoch. All right, then there were some other questions from prehistory they had. What was the Neolithic Revolution that occurred during the New Stone Age? That, of course, was the period where humans began to develop farming or agriculture. They think that agriculture was one of the main cultural changes that led to civilization, developing cities and advanced culture over time. So it's primarily agriculture, is the big cultural revolution. What are some ancient Neolithic sites that show evidence of early farming and civilization? Where are they located? The oldest is Tel Es Sultan, or ancient Jericho, which is located in the West Bank. We call it Palestine. It dates back to maybe 10,000 BC. So it is one of the oldest. There's also Göbekli Tepe, which is in Turkey. The name means pot belly hill. Discovered in the 1960s, and it's famous for its some kind of religious holy site. I think it was some kind of temple that was built there, where they did like animal sacrifices and so on. And I think there's some kind of city or maybe around or village that was part of it. Katal Huyuk is another Turkish site, Neolithic site, about 32 acres in size, found in southern Turkey. The name means fork mound. It's a famous Neolithic site that's well known for its mud huts, ones with have the doorways and the roof and all that. I don't know at Ain Ghazal. I wouldn't worry about that one as much. That was another Neolithic site that was found in what is Jordan, northwestern Jordan. It's about 37 acres, and it's the one that was famous for those statues that they made of people. So anyway, so that's like the Neolithic section, which is, like I said, the shortest part, that we have pretty much on the test. Now let's get into the main ones, of course, which is Mesopotamia. What does the term Mesopotamia mean in Greek? What two main rivers are located in Iraq? The term Mesopotamia means land between the rivers, which I told you was a famous term invented by a writer named Arrian, who lived in ancient times, Greek writer. What two main rivers are located in Iraq? The Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Euphrates to the west, and then the Tigris to the east of it. What are the other terms used for Iraq, such as Fertile Crescent, cradle of civilization? Well, that first term, Fertile Crescent, was a popular term invented in the 1910s by James Henry Breasted. He was an American archaeologist, and he was describing the fertile valleys of where all the different civilizations were in Mesopotamia, like the Sumerians and the Sumerians and the Akkadians and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Phoenicians and the Israelites, all were located in Tigris River, Euphrates River valleys, and don't forget the Jordan River. Some people even throw it in the Nile. Cradle civilization is a term they use to describe the fact that Mesopotamia is considered one of the birthplaces of like the earliest civilizations. They use that for all over the world, but it's commonly used for Mesopotamia, which is in southwestern Asia. What biblical stories associated with the Mesopotamian region? I told you that the story of the like the Garden of Eden is a common story in the Bible that's well known in the book of Genesis. The flood story also as well, like of Noah and the ark. The Tower of Babel also as well appears in the book of Genesis. Don't forget Ur, like the city where Abraham came from. It's located in southern Iraq. Is also associated usually with the same region. What were examples of Semitic civilization of people that lived throughout the Mesopotamian region? They had the Semitic peoples, remember, were peoples that were mostly from like southwestern Asia. Right? That's where their origins were. So that would include such as the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Syrians, the Chaldeans, Phoenicians, Israelites, Arabs. So Arabs and Jews quite commonly, are the main groups, I guess, that are still considered Semitic. People related like the Chaldean peoples or Assyrian peoples, like speaking like a variation of Aramaic. Today, like Neo-Aramaic, like I showed you before, is basically like Semitic peoples. Most of their languages are written right to left. Not all, but most of them are. Anyway, which Indo-European civilizations lived in Turkey and Iran? Turkey, they had the Hittites, who I'll get to later, who were kind of considered like an Indo-European people. And the Iranians really are not really, the term Indo-European isn't really used. They're really Indo-Aryan is what they really are. Let's see what else. So we got those two together, Turkey and Iran. So we got them. Now, I also need to get into the early Sumerian culture. Who were the Sumerians? What was the land of Sumer? The Sumerians were, of course, the first civilization of Mesopotamia. They're the most ancient one that goes back to like 3 to 4,000 millennium. And they're like an advanced culture that developed in southern Iraq, based around mostly agricultural-based city-states. And Sumer was what they called their country, like where they lived, like with the different city-states that they resided. And they weren't one kingdom. They were multiple kingdoms, which were like city-states, usually a city with a state with it, a capital. And what were some city-states they founded? I told you Ur was one of the most famous because of Abraham was from there in the Bible. So it's mentioned like in the book of Genesis. Also, they had Eridu, I told you about, which they think might be one of the oldest cities. And then they have another one called Iraq, I told you about, usually spelled Uruk. Iraq. That one is considered the largest, the most famous one. It's also the story connected to the Epic of Gilgamesh, because supposedly Gilgamesh was the king of that city-state. What was cuneiform? How did one write in cuneiform? Cuneiform was like a Sumerian writing system, which everybody adopted in Mesopotamia. Up to like, I want to say Nebuchadnezzar's time, they used it. And it was written on clay tablets. So clay tablets was the form of medium they wrote on. They didn't have paper. They may have written on stone too, like the Hammurabi Code as well. But they mostly wrote on like clay tablets. Cuneiform means in Latin wedge shape because of the shape of the symbols that were used in the actual language system. What was the Epic of Gilgamesh? The Epic of Gilgamesh was a famous epic story told by the Sumerians, which described the adventures of the king of Iraq, whose name was Gilgamesh or Bilgamesh, either one. And it's considered one of the oldest stories ever written. It's actually older than the Bible. What famous disasters mentioned in it, which is similar to the Genesis story? There is a flood story that's like Noah's Ark. So that's talk about the Noah story, basically. And so it's very similar to the flood story of Noah. What are some technologies, innovations that the Sumerians were known for? They were known for all kinds of inventions. Besides cuneiform, they think they developed the wheel, which led to like the chariot, the cart, the sailboat. They had irrigation, probably had early like bronze plows. They had forms of math. They had a calendar system in engineering. They can do astronomy and time and all that, which you saw before. They invented beer. They knew about the minute. They knew about the hour and all that. They had organized religion. They have a ziggurat also, which they are, of course, famous for developing. What were the ziggurats? The ziggurats were these Mesopotamian step pyramids that were made of mud brick. They were built throughout ancient Mesopotamia down to about Nebuchadnezzar's time. And there are a lot of different examples of some that were built. They have the one in the Bible. The Tower of Babel, they think, is like some kind of biblical version of like a ziggurat. And I think it's kind of like a variation of probably Intiminanki, which was supposedly the tallest ziggurat ever built, possibly by King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. That would have been like 6th century BC. Of course, the one that survived, we've talked about before, is the Great Ziggurat of Ur, or Ziggurat of Ur. That one, of course, was kind of rediscovered by Sir Leonard Woolley, who was a British archaeologist who excavated it, and he began rebuilding it, which was rebuilt over time. That's the one that's still around today. That's probably the best in condition that they've rebuilt. They have other ones, but that's the best one that they've rebuilt overall. Oh, don't forget, they also have the Hanging Guards of Babylon. That was, which they think was built by Nebuchadnezzar as well, is also considered kind of like, is also a ziggurat. And as I told you before, one of the 7 wonders of the world at one point by the Greeks. What are the 3 main gods of the Sumerians? What were they attributed to? I think I told you the chief god was the god Anu. You have Anu, who was first, and can't give it the studio. But you have Anu. Anu is the highest god, like a sky god, kind of like a Zeus type god, you know. And then the other two, Enki and Enlil, were also his sons. He had two sons. Enki was the kind of like an earth god, who was like lord of like the water and wisdom. And then you had Enlil, which was like his other son. He was like a lord of like, or god of the air or wind. It was also associated with like storms in the earth and so on. And then you had Marduk as well. Marduk was a popular Babylonian god. Marduk was the son of Enki. He was like a god of magic and water. Then we talked about the Akkadians. The Akkadians came in and they took over Mesopotamia. They formed like the Akkadian Empire. The Akkadians were a Semitic people that eventually became a mix of Sumerian and Akkadian peoples. The two cultures were kind of merged together as one. And the Akkadian Empire was founded by this famous king named Sargon the Great, who also called Sargon of Akkad. He's called all kinds of names, even Sargon the First. He lived around the end of the 24th century. He's considered the founder of the Akkadian Empire, which eventually took over all of Mesopotamia, but it later collapsed. He was only around for like 100-something years before other people conquered it. Then we talked about the Babylonians. That was in a later lecture. The Babylonians were a type of Semitic people that were a mix of like predominantly like the Akkadians and other cultures, maybe like Sumerians, I guess, before. And then don't forget, they had this other culture that came in that was also Semitic called the Amorites. The Amorites were eventually the ones that controlled the state. They were all the kings or dynasties of kings that would control Babylonia. Like Hammurabi was an Amorite king. They're from like Syria somewhere, the Amorites. Which king founded the old Babylonian Empire? The Babylonian Empire, of course, was founded by King Hammurabi, who was their sixth king. He founded a state based around the city of Babylon, which is located on the Euphrates River, kind of like in central Iraq. It's about where it's at. So he developed it in the early 18th century. And they call it Old or Paleo Babylonian Empire because don't forget there's a new one later that's ruled by Nebuchadnezzar, the Neo or New Babylonian Empire, which I'll get to later. What was the Code of Hammurabi? The Code of Hammurabi was a 18th century Babylonian law code system that was developed by King Hammurabi. It helped to basically create stability in his empire. The code, if you know about it, was considered one of the first major written law codes ever developed at that time. And it eventually was written on these tablets, these stone columns that are called a stele. There's only one, remember one that I showed you before it survived, that's now in the Louvre in Paris, France. It had like something like 282 laws that were eventually written on them. And I told you how the laws work. The laws worked on the fact that they worked on what they call a principle of retaliation, or eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Yeah, tooth for a tooth, which I told is called lex talionis, or law of retaliation, which is what it means. So it's kind of like an idea of equal justice, but it's not necessarily where they take your eye out for another eye. It could be a fine or something else. What civilization in ancient Turkey sacked the Babylonians? Well, Babylonians, they were sacked by different peoples. They had the Gutians, I know, in Iran, they think, who were kind of mysterious, that came in. And then don't forget the Hittites that were in Turkey. That was the main group that really destroyed Babylon. The Hittites were a type of Indo-European people that they think originated from what is, they think, the Ukraine, close to where the southern part of the Black Sea is. And they think they migrated into Turkey, which I told you a long time ago, they used to call Turkey Anatolia, or the geographic name is also Asia Minor as well. So over time, they would form the Hittite Empire, and the so-called Neo-Hittite Empire, which peaked close to about 1200 BC. What new technology was first mass-produced by the Hittites? Of course, as you know, the Hittites were the ones that were the first to mass-produce iron technology. They figured out they could take iron ore especially, and make weapons and tools out of it. They think that contributed to starting the Iron Age, which would follow later afterwards. It's not in the study guide, but don't forget, there's probably at least one question on the test about the Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples were these seafaring Iron Age peoples that attacked the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea, and they destroyed the Hittite Empire, sacked their capital, Atusha, I think it's called, as we talked about. And so it caused a lot of these Bronze Age cultures to kind of collapse throughout the Near East. Like I know Egypt kind of collapsed afterwards, and a few others. And they always talk about the Bronze Age collapse period, which I'll kind of get more into later. We get more towards like the Greeks and all that. Who are the Assyrians? Where did they develop as a civilization and empire? The Assyrians developed in the kind of like in the northern part of Iraq and part of Syria. And they were a Semitic people. Remember, they spoke Aramaic, now Neo-Aramaic, of course, today, as they call it sometimes. And they were known for their different empires. The most famous, of course, was the Neo or New Assyrian Empire, which was considered one of the first major Iron Age empires to control the. Anyway, the Assyrian Empire developed around like several cities. The most famous, of course, early on was the city of Ashur that developed along the Tigris River basin. Don't forget, they also have another city called Nineveh as well. That will be really its main capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And the term Ashur, though, the name Ashur is also derived from a famous god they had. The Assyrians had a chief god that was also called Ashur, just like the city. It was like a war god, because you can say, the Assyrians were a very warlike people overall. They also had the fertility goddess you may have heard of, we talked about before, named Ishtar. Ishtar was believed to be some kind of god that evolved from Inanna, which was a Sumerian goddess. And Ishtar is very similar to, like, Aphrodite or the Egyptian version of Isis that you have later. Why were the Assyrians cool conquerors? That question right there. Well, the Assyrians were known for their great military, which occupied vast amounts of territory. In fact, they were the first Near Eastern Empire, which controlled part of southwestern Asia and also North Africa. And I remember I told you that they were known for being masters of siege warfare. They would, take cities out, and then they would take the population and they would deport them all. I think I told you how they did this mass deportation where they deported all the best people back to Assyria to use them as slaves, to use them in their armies, and those that they didn't keep, they killed them all, pretty much. So yeah, they had like a bad name because of that. Like in the Bible, like the Israelites talk about the Assyrians a lot. They hated them. They thought they were just villains to them. Anyway, what was the Neo-Assyrian Empire? The Neo-Assyrian Empire was like an Iron Age empire. The Assyrians that lasted from about the 10th century down to about the late 7th century. And lasted about 300 years or so. And it was the peak of the Assyrians as a culture. And the empire itself was the biggest under it, especially I think around the 7th century when they controlled like part of Egypt, Iraq, part of Turkey, and also around where Israel is. Is that because the Assyrians conquered like Israel, like Samaria and all that. Let's see. What city became the main capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, go ahead. I just did that one right there. That was, of course, Nineveh. Yeah, Nineveh we talked about, which replaced Assur's importance, which is right above Assur, is where it's located, like north of Baghdad. It's close to Mosul, is where it's at now. And today it's mostly just a bunch of ruins now overall. But at one point, it was considered one of the largest cities in the world before Babylon replaced it. Who were some famous rulers of the Neo-Assyrian Empire? I've talked about mostly three that were big. They had Tiglath-Pileser III. He was the first one, which kind of is the guy that really starts to really expand the whole Neo-Assyrian Empire. And he's the one, he and his son, Sargon II, conquered most of like Israel. They took over like Babylonia as an example. Sargon II was probably the most famous king because he was famous for founding the Sargonid dynasty, which is a dynasty of Assyrian kings of about 6 of them, which go down to about 612 or so. And they had also his grandson, Ashurbanipal, as well, who might be the last great Assyrian king you have. What Assyrian ruler built the Royal Library of Nineveh? That was Ashurbanipal. Yeah, Ashurbanipal. And Ashurbanipal, of course, built the first ancient library in the world, which was famous for having like tablets like the Epic of Gilgamesh in it, which they found the most complete version in that library today. All right, let me move on. And so, yeah, we finished up the Assyrians. Let me also, for a few minutes, let me talk about the Chaldeans. Now, who are the Chaldeans? They came in next. The Chaldeans were involved in sacking Assyria. They overthrew them in like kind of a revolt. The Chaldeans were a type of Semitic people that were from southern Iraq. And they were actually part of the Assyrian Empire. They revolted and they overthrew them. And the state was founded by a king named Nabopolassar, who was the father of King Nebuchadnezzar, who will come later. Why was their empire called New or Neo-Babylonian, or New Babylonian Empire? It was called that because this was a new type of Mesopotamian state that was based around Babylon. Again, Babylonia. And they call it that because so people don't confuse with Hammurabi's Babylonian state, which is often called the older Paleo-Babylonian. So that's the reason for the different names. So it has a lot to do with also archaeology in the historical time period of where these two empires were. So this empire is predominantly very short-lived. I think it's only for around like 74 or 75 years. And of course, the king that was the most famous one, the greatest one, was King Nebuchadnezzar, who reigned 40-something years, down to maybe about 562 BC. And what famous 7-wonder world did he construct for his wife in Babylon? I talked about this before, but Nebuchadnezzar was well known for rebuilding Babylon. He built like several ziggurats, one being the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which later collapsed, which the Greeks thought was a 7th wonder. He also, they think, built another one called Entemenanke, which later also collapsed, which they think Entemenanke might be the influence on the Tower of Babel, as they theorize about that. He also built like the fortifications, and I think I showed you before how Nebuchadnezzar was the one they think that built the Ishtar Gate, one of the main gates into Babylon, which at that time was the largest city in the world. What famous king and temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in the 580s? That was the kingdom of Judah, which survived because like the northern state of Israel, of Samaria, had been destroyed by the Assyrians already, but Judah had survived. But it was sacked around 586 BC. They think that Nebuchadnezzar was the one that destroyed the Temple of Solomon, as they called it. It says, what book of the Old Testament describes his reign and conquest? So there's several books I think he was in. I think the most famous is the book of Daniel that they always talk about, I think the most. There's Jeremiah and I think a few others that he's also mentioned as well. So that's pretty much on Mesopotamia. But like I said, you know, I'm not going to have Egypt. I'm not going to have like the part on Persian Empire, the Phoenicians and Israelites. So I'm going to get to those later in the week, likely on, looks like on Wednesday, I'm going to cover that, of course, in the future. All right, let me get into next and talk about Egypt. And by the way, if you have any questions for me, let me know for later so I can go over them. Like if you want to repeat something or whatever, let me know. And I can do that, but just have those questions later ready for me, you know, so I go through these different study guide questions for you. All right. So anyway, it says, what are some geographic features that make the Nile unique, of course? So we're talking about ancient Egypt. I told you how the Nile River is famous for being one of the longest rivers in the world, over 4,100 miles long. I think it's like almost 4,189, I think might be the actual link with the tributaries. It is famous for flowing like south to north. This is flowing from like around the Africa's equator and all that toward the Mediterranean Sea. What famous quote is attributed to Herodotus on why Egypt flourished as civilization? I told you that Herodotus said that Egypt was the gift of the Nile because of the fact that the river gave birth to the civilization. It led to agriculture, and agriculture led to civilization. And so that's what he's talking about. So Herodotus was one of the first historians, you know, I told you about, and actually wrote about, you know, ancient Egypt. What two tributaries form the main trunk of the Nile River? I told you how they have two main trunks of the Nile River. You have the Blue Nile and you have the White Nile. Blue Nile starts in like Ethiopia. And the White Nile, of course, starts way down in Lake Victoria, close to Tanzania, all that. And if they flow northward and they form a trunk together, one trunk as the Nile main body of the river at what is Khartoum in Sudan. What are these Egyptian terms, of course, they use about Egypt a lot? The cataract, if you know about, I told you before, the Nile River then flows down these 6 cataracts, which are these sets of like waterfalls, and I think they have rapids, as well as it goes down the escarpments of Africa toward the Mediterranean Sea. And so that's what that is. There's 6 of them. Most of them are in northern Sudan, predominantly. Kemet is the ancient Egyptian name for what they call it Egypt, but that's the hieroglyphic name that they have, Kemet, which I told you meant black land, of course. And then Deshret was the Egyptian name for the mostly for the desert areas of Egypt. They call it red land, non-fertile areas. Although also Deshret can be also used for the northern part of Egypt, like around the delta, where the lower kingdom was. What 2 Egyptian states emerged at the end of the Neolithic period? I'm sorry, I skipped the question. What was the main season of Egypt when the Nile flooded? I'm sorry about that. They had 3 seasons I told you about. Ket was the main season. That's the most important one, which was the flood season. Actually means inundation. And then I told you the other 2 ones were called Peret. Yeah, Peret, which was like the sowing season, which happened before that usually. Although they really had 2 seasons where they grow crops like we do, spring, fall kind of thing. They don't really have a summer. They don't have a winter over there, really. They mostly pretty warm during the year. But then Shema, I say it, Shema, of course, was the harvest season, which would come after the flood season primarily. So I think I told you they mostly grew like grain crops and so on in ancient Egypt. What 2 Egyptian states emerged after the end of the Neolithic period? Well, I told you they had like the Upper Kingdom, which was in Upper Egypt, which would be like the southern part of Egypt, closer to like the Sudan and where Luxor is today, the city of Luxor. And then you have that state, which I told you the king had like a white crown that he wore. And then the other state was the Lower Kingdom, which was like in the northern part of Egypt, like mostly around the Delta area of Egypt. And that king wore, like that pharaoh wore a red crown. I think the red crown was called a deshret. I think the white crown for the upper state was called a hedjet. Just like what they called them anyway. Over time, they combined the two crowns together as one that the pharaohs ruled under. Which king or pharaoh unified Egypt? What was the Egyptian name? They think the king Menes, according to the Greeks, they think was the first pharaoh that united the two states together. They think he was a king from the upper kingdom that forced the lower one to merge. And the Egyptians had a hieroglyphic name for him that was Narmer, which they think has a catfish in the cartouche or something like that. There's kind of a debate about what the name means, catfish or something like that. But what are some achievements of Narmer or Menes? Well, besides unifying the state of Egypt as one empire, he was the one that founded their capital, their administrative capital of Memphis. He also had the first dynasty of Egypt. He was also the first pharaoh to wear both crowns, both red and white, which is, by the way, seen on that famous Narmer palette that I told you about, of course, which describes his reign, and the oldest artifact, that basically is on early ancient Egypt, pre-dynastic period is, I think, what they usually call it, that period of Narmer. What are the three main historical kingdoms or periods of ancient Egypt? This one might be a chronological question on the test, but basically don't forget the three main kingdoms were the Old Kingdom, you had the Middle Kingdom, and you had the New Kingdom. Pretty easy. They also got all those intermediate periods as well. I might have maybe one question or two about the second intermediate period, about the Hyksos later. What is the cult of Amun-Ra? It's sometimes a nickname for all the different cults associated with Amun, the god Amun, because Amun was the state god of ancient Egypt. And basically, it was the god of all gods. He was kind of like Zeus or Jupiter to them. And they think that all the gods were kind of like manifestations of Amun, they believe. Then Ra was merged with them, solar deity. And so Amun-Ra is kind of like a solar deity. I think it's a creator god also as well. What were some major gods that I talked about ancient Egypt? I think the next god I talked about after that was Anubis, I believe. Anubis was the jackal god associated with the dead and mummification. So you had him as an example. I think I talked about Horus. Horus was the sky god, god of kingship. He was a falcon god, also a war god. He was the one that was the son of Osiris, one of the chief gods of Egypt, and his wife, Isis, was his mother as well. So we talked about those two. Talk about Isis and Osiris. Isis was a famous fertility goddess of ancient Egypt. She's well known. She's kind of like Ishtar, like a version of her, Egyptian version. We also talked about Osiris, who was basically Isis' husband. And Osiris was considered like the king of the dead. What else we talked about? We talked about Set. I think, Set, the god of chaos, desert, and infertility. He was, of course, a brother of Osiris. He's often associated, of course, with desert storms and stuff like that. And Set was the one that tried to steal the throne from Osiris in Egyptian mythology. Let's see. We also talked about Thoth. Thoth was the god of wisdom, writing, and hieroglyphics. He was like a bird god, and he's one that gave the Egyptians papyrus. Then I think I also talked about Sobek. Yeah, Sobek was another one, which was the crocodile god associated with the military, the pharaoh's power, and it was a big cult, like where Fayum was. I think about Imhotep too. Imhotep was like a god of medicine that later deified, who was an actual man, like that famous priest Imhotep that built the first pyramid. I wouldn't worry about him, but I did mention him as well before. Let's see what else. What was mummification? Mummification, of course, was just the Arabic nickname for the Egyptian funerary practice, where the Egyptians would embalm their dead or prepare their dead for the afterlife. Because remember, the Egyptians were obsessed with trying to preserve the body so that soul would make it through the underworld. What was the origin of the word mummy or mummification? The term mummy came from what they call tar pitch or bitumen, which the Arabs called it mumia, basically. And this asphalt material, they think is what most of it was kind of like, was basically used in the embalming process. And they think they use it to cover the mummy after they would complete it. What were the main processes of mummification? There's only more than 4. There might be as many as 10 processes really with it, but I gave you 4 main ones I kind of talked about the most. One was where they removed the organs from the body. That was the first thing they did, except the heart. Heart was the only thing they kept in the body for the afterlife. Then they took the organs and they put them in canopic jars, like 4 of them usually. And they were protected by the 4 sons of Horus. I don't know if you're going to have to know the 4 sons of Horus, just know who they were. But they were Domatef, Kabesanef, Hapi, and Emseti. Those are the 4 that protect the canopic jars. It's called 4 sons of Horus. Those are the children and sons, of course, of the god Horus. And then they took, after that, they then would stuff the body cavity, which there's kind of a controversy over what was actually put in the body. It just depends on what source you read. Greeks had all kinds of theories on what went into the actual body. I know for sure linen was one thing they stuffed in there for sure. Then the third thing they did, of course, the most famous thing they did was they covered the body in mineral salt, which the Greeks called it natron, which is kind of like baking soda. That was the longest process, which I think that part took about 6 weeks overall. And the fourth main process they did, of course, was that they then would wrap the body using linen bandages, and then they would, from there, put some kind of coating on the outside, which they think the tar pitch or mumia was used on the outside of the body. It's like a type of resin, really, that they would put on the outside of the body. Let's see what else. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the Old Kingdom. Now, what dynasties dominated the Old Kingdom? The Old Kingdom was dominated by the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th dynasties. 4th dynasty, of course, was the most famous. Why is the Old Kingdom nicknamed the Age of Pyramids? It's nicknamed because of the fact that that's when they built most of the pyramids in Egypt, which I told you they built close to about 80 of them. 4th dynasty being the one that built the most overall. Abydos, Saqqara, Giza are all examples of different necropolis sites, which there's a bunch of those in ancient Egypt overall, including like the Valley of the Kings as an example. Midam was another one I think I told you about. Dashur was another one also as well. Or Mastaba or Mastaba. Mastaba were a type of mud brick tomb that was built in ancient Egypt. Mastaba supposedly meant either mud bench or stone bench because they were made out of mud brick. It looks like stone, but it's really mud brick, more or less. And a bunch of these, early rulers and I guess ministers had different types of tombs that were built like that. I think they had one, like Narmer had one back in the pre-dynastic period, like at Abydos. Which dynasty and king developed the first step pyramid at Saqqara? That was developed, of course, by the 3rd dynasty, and the king was King Zoser or Djoser. He built the first step pyramid. Saqqara is like a necropolis site that was built near Memphis, where they built a bunch of pyramids there, early pyramids. It's usually called the Pyramid of Zoser or Djoser. Who was the architect who built it? It was built by this Egyptian priest who was likely like some kind of chancellor of King Djoser, whose name was Imhotep. Imhotep was like a polymath. He was like an engineer, mathematician, kind of a genius, kind of like an Egyptian Aristotle. He was also some kind of doctor. So he built the first one. I wouldn't worry about the size of the height. And I don't think I'm going to ask you about the height of it and all that, probably. But it was the first pyramid ever built. But it was a step pyramid. Which king built the first true pyramid? He was, of course, the father of Khufu, as you can see. He built the bent and the red pyramids. That was, of course, King Snefru. Snefru built those two pyramids, which were built at Dashur. What was unique about those two pyramids? The bent pyramid was the first smooth-sided pyramid ever built in ancient Egypt. And it was eventually collapsed, I think, or somewhat collapsed, and he never used it as his own actual tomb. It's famous for its white limestone casing. It does have like these two, like I think I told you, it has like two inclinations, like a bent shape to it, where the bottom slope is like 54 degrees and the top slope of it is like 43-degree angle. So it has kind of a weird bent shape to it. Then the red pyramid, of course, is considered to be the first successful smooth-sided pyramid ever constructed. Successful one, because the bent one it just wasn't finished, they think. And that became his tomb. And it's known for its reddish color due to reddish iron ore being used. It's the third tallest pyramid in the world, behind the Great Pyramid and the Pyramid of Khafre. I don't know about the height on that one. Wouldn't worry about it. Who builds the Great Pyramid at Giza Plateau near Cairo? That, of course, was King Khufu, also known as King Cheops. And he, of course, was considered to be one of the greatest pharaohs of the 4th dynasty. The Great Pyramid was the greatest and largest pyramid ever constructed in ancient Egypt. It was built to a height of about 480 feet tall. So that's the tallest one ever built. And then the width of it on each side was about 756 feet on each side, like the width of it, or length of the width. About 13 acres in size. 2.3 million stone blocks, of course, were about in it, roughly. How are they built? There's different theories on how it was built. As you know, it's one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The only one that survived from a long time ago. And they believe it was, they think it was mostly built using like brute labor, like human labor. They didn't use like any draft animals. They didn't have horses yet in ancient Egypt until the Hyksos came in. So no hill horses, no oxen. It's believed that they used skilled labor, like some of the farmers and other skilled labor were used to construct. And then they believe they used some kind of mud brick ramping system, which they've used throughout Egypt before and later. I think in the New Kingdom, they use a lot of mud brick type ramping construction to actually build buildings like pylons, like at Thebes, where the Karnak temple was built. What 2 other major pyramids are at Giza? They also got the Pyramid of Khafre. He was the son of King Khufu. He built the 2nd largest pyramid in ancient Egypt. That was built to a height of 471 feet originally. Width is about 706 feet on each side, so it's about almost similar in size, except if you know about Khafre's pyramid, it's famous for having part of the upper limestone casing still on it, which is how you can tell which is which. So you have that one. And don't forget Menkaure, or Myceranos, had the 3rd pyramid of Giza. That one was the smallest, only about 215 feet tall of the 3 Giza pyramids. And I told you that one was probably built smaller because of economic reasons. What was the Great Sphinx? The Great Sphinx was some kind of royal statue that they think was built by King Khafre to honor his father Khufu. It's a royal statue, which is an image of a mythical sphinx, which is a lion with a man's head on it. And the Sphinx, of course, is considered to be one of those mysterious things that was constructed at the Giza complex. There's been a lot of debate about it. There's, like it might be older than what it is. And it's famous for being buried multiple times and being uncovered. I think I also told you about the nose and all that too. But I wouldn't worry about the stats on like how long it is and the height of it. So don't worry about that. What was the Egyptian hieroglyphs? That's just like the Greek nickname for what they call the ancient Egyptian language system they had in Egypt. Hieroglyphs means either, can have different translations, but usually it means sacred carvings or priestly carvings, or you could say writings also as well, because it was mostly written originally on stone, maybe wood. And then later, when they had papyrus, they wrote in like cursive forms. Which I tell you, the two main cursive forms were hieratic and demotic. Those two, which are, like I said, written on paper or papyrus. Why was the discovery of the Rosetta Stone important? When was it discovered? Rosetta Stone was this half-ton stone found in 1799 by Napoleon Bonaparte's forces when they invaded Egypt. This is in the late 18th century. It's found by a French soldier. I think his name was Pierre-Francois Bouchard. And it was basically some type of message about a coronation, inscription of a coronation of King Ptolemy V of the Ptolemaic dynasty, like him coming king. And it was written in three languages, I told you, which were, I think I told you they were hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek. And the discovery was important because it led to modern times people being able to translate and read hieroglyphs. Who was the one who first translated the Rosetta Stone? And I think around 1822, maybe, Jean-Francois Champollion was the first to actually read it. He was a French language expert who was considered, by the way, one of the first fathers of Egyptology, studying ancient Egypt. When did the Hyksos invasion of Egypt occur? That occurred during the Second Intermediate Period, which was a chaotic period between the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom. The Hyksos were a type of Semitic Asiatic peoples that came out of like where Canaan is, which is kind of where Israel and Lebanon is today. And they were famous for having like the war chariot, composite bow type weapons. They introduced the horses to Egypt. And it allowed the Hyksos to seize power over Egypt. Like I think mostly they conquered like the lower part of Egypt, like the Delta area, basically. What does the name Hyksos mean in Greek? There's different translations, but it means either foreign kings or they'll sometimes give it the long name, rulers of foreign lands. Shepherd kings, by the way, is sometimes mentioned, but they think it's a mistranslation that some of the Greeks and Josephus kind of talks about. Flavius Josephus, I think, called him that, but they think it's wrong. And whether the Hyksos were related to the Israelites, they're not sure. They may have been. They think the Israelites may have come at the same time. After the Hyksos were driven out, what dynasty was begun by the King Ahmose, who started the New Kingdom? Ahmose started the 18th dynasty, which was the dynasty that started the New Kingdom of Egypt. What dynasties dominated the New Kingdom? They had three dynasties. You had the 18th dynasty, which is sometimes called the Timosid dynasty. Then you had the 19th and 20th dynasties, which are sometimes called the Ramessid dynasties. So 18, 19, and 20. 18th, of course, the most famous, of course, overall. What was the Valley of the Kings? Where was it built in ancient Egypt? The Valley of the Kings was a necropolis burial site that was started by the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom. In fact, the king that started it was a king named Thutmose I, the father of Queen Hatshepsut. And something like 62 tombs were built there, rock-cut tombs. And it was built in western Thebes, in the upper part of Egypt, across from Thebes, or what we call Luxor today. What was the religious capital of the New Kingdom, especially for the cult of Amen? That, of course, was Thebes, where modern Luxor is today. And that was, of course, where they built the famous Karnak temple complex. It was the cult center of Amen, the Amen cult. Who was Queen Hatshepsut? What was she famous for? Queen Hatshepsut was considered the greatest female ruler of ancient Egypt. She, of course, was part of the 18th dynasty. She was, of course, the daughter of Tutmos the First. I believe she was the 5th pharaoh of Egypt. Anyway, she was famous for her 22-year reign, where she basically took control of Egypt from her stepson, basically, who was later Tutmos the Third. And under her, they talk about how Egypt was a golden age. They traded with like East Africa, like where Somalia is, or the land of Punt. And I also told you about how Hatshepsut was well known for her mortuary temple. The mortuary temple of Hatshepsut was built in western Thebes, often called Deir al-Bahri, or the Northern Monastery. And it's a type of temple which is really the closest that the Egyptians came to like the neoclassical period of in the classical period of people building temples, like of Greece. The classical period of Greece or Rome, building temples like that or structures like that, of course, later. That was the one that was built by Senenmut, which I think you may have seen in that documentary I gave you. What religious change did Akhenaten make to Egypt? Let me talk about that one too as well. Akhenaten was known as Amenhotep IV. He was a radical pharaoh who, in the 14th century, started this monotheistic cult, which was based on this sun god that was called Aten. It was called the sun disk god. It was a minor god of Egypt. And he tried to make it a major god and replace the god Amen with the god Aten. So he changed his name to Akhenaten, as you know, I told you before. And he closed the capital, like the Thebes was the capital. He shut that down, and he moved the capital to another city called Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten, which the Arabs called later Tel El Amarna in central or middle Egypt. And for several years, he ruled from there with this monotheistic cult. And a lot of people didn't like it. They didn't like this new religion. And so after he died and his wife died, Nefertiti, they got rid of it. So eventually it failed in the long run. But it was kind of like his attempt to kind of push monotheism on everybody, have one God, but obviously to take power from the cult of Amen. So like we have one slide left here. Who was his famous wife? His famous wife, of course, was Nefertiti, the Queen Nefertiti, who they think she was considered the most beautiful queen of Egypt. And she was the one they think that may have ruled briefly as a pharaoh after Akhenaten died. So she was involved in the cult also. Then you have Tutankhamun, King Tut, of course, that came in. He was like one of the last major rulers of the 18th dynasty, the son of, they think, Akhenaten. What did he achieve during his short reign? King Tut was primarily known for restoring a lot of the cults, like the religious cults of Amen, the Amen cult, to ancient Egypt. And he also moved back to Thebes. They got rid of the Akhetaten as the capital, and they went back to Thebes under his reign. It's not known for much. He's mostly known for his youthful reign of maybe 9 or 10 years, from the age of 9 to about 18. And so that's why he was called the Boy King, because he never really got to full adulthood overall. King Tut, of course, became more famous for his tomb, KV 62. It was found in the Valley of the Kings. It was discovered in November 1922 by Howard Carter. Howard Carter, of course, was a famous British archaeologist. He's known for finding other things too, like I think he found Hatshepsut's mummy and all that. But, or one of those mummies, one of those, I think so, one of those. But what was unique about the discovery of King Tut's tomb? Well, as you know, his tomb was the only tomb found in the Valley of the Kings that remained intact. They found it with all of its treasure, including the mummy and its death mask. And so that became one of the greatest discoveries ever in modern Egypt today, discovery of King Tut's tomb overall. And of course, it spawned like the curse of the mummy and all that stuff, which most of that's probably a bunch of bunk. It's not really true about King Tut. Tut died young, I said, and of course he had two advisors that reigned later. I think A and Horemheb, but I wouldn't worry about them. They reigned afterwards as pharaohs. And then they had the other two dynasties they had was 19th and 20th dynasty. They had the Ramessids, named after like Ramses the Great and all these other Ramses rulers. I think they had 11 pharaohs that were named Ramses in the 19th and 20th dynasties. Ramses the Second, or the Great, of course, was considered to be the greatest pharaoh of the New Kingdom. He was the peak ruler of the New Kingdom's empire. He reigned in the 13th century. And under him, the empire peaked in size from like Sudan, Egypt, and Libya. It went all the way up into like southwestern Asia and Mesopotamia into Syria. So it was a massive empire under Ramses the Great. And Ramses is famous for a lot of things. He's one of the longest reigning pharaohs in Egypt's history, ancient Egypt's history. 66, 67 years is roughly how long he was in power overall. He is known for having a lot of children, like over 100 children, 50-something sons at least. They were buried in KV5, I think, in that tomb in the Valley of the Kings. And of course, I've told you that they think he's the pharaoh that's associated with the so-called Exodus story, like with Moses. A lot of people use him as a character, like in a lot of those movies and stories about the Exodus, but they don't know if that's true or not. So he's just kind of connected sometimes to that, but they don't know if he is or not. So it's kind of debated about that. What were some famous temples he built in ancient Egypt? I told you he completed the hypostyle hall, which was part of the Karnak temple complex. He was involved with his father, Seti I, in building that. Also the temple of Ramses the Great at Abu Simbel in southern Egypt, which was a rock-cut temple. He constructed that, which was cut out of a mountain. That was one that had to be moved because of the Aswan High Dam being built around the 1960s. And he also had the Ramesseum temple I told you about, which was a mortuary temple that was built in western Thebes as well. So that's pretty much the majority of the material, of course, from the study guide, all the different questions. So you can, of course, go back and review that. Look at my lectures, of course, again, if you need to. I think most of you probably already looked at all the lectures already, hopefully. But I have pretty much put the assignment. If I could kind of share it to you, I could kind of bring it up real quick for you and show you. But I do have the announcement posted about the quiz right here. You can see it, which is right there. Let me blow it up so you can see it better. But there's the announcement about it. And, of course, the assignment below where it says first exam on the bottom. So, like I said, it's worth 200 points toward the semester, due by next week, Monday, February 15th. That may be extended, as you know. I know that's Mardi Gras coming up. That will be off, pretty much Monday, Tuesday next week for Mardi Gras. But I'll probably get it extended a couple of days because of that, likely. But those are all the topics, of course, for it. And, of course, if you click into it, it'll take you to the actual assignment, which is right there. So, like I said, it does have a time limit, 40-minute time limit, of course, for it, 2 attempts for it. When you, by the way, choose an answer, it will lock it in. So I'm not using Proctorio for it, but you put an answer in, it's locked. So you can't change it. You have to take it again or something like that. So anyway, I guess that's it for pretty much today with the review. I guess nobody had any questions about the study guide, but you can go back and look at it. It's the great thing about YouTube. I guess you can kind of stop and start it or whatever you want with it. But if you have any questions about it, let me know. You can, just send me a comment through this video on my YouTube channel. And so later in the week, I will be having another lecture on Wednesday, which I think is February the 10th, which I think I might already have that posted for later today. But I'm going to be, of course, lecturing mostly about the Phoenicians and the Israelites. And if I have any time, I'm going to go into And I'm going to talk about also the rise of the Persian Empire. So I'm going to be getting into new material, of course, soon on that. But like I said, all that, like I just talked about, is not going to be on the exam, just prehistory, Mesopotamia, and of course, Egypt. So I guess no questions. So I guess I hope you'll have a good rest of the week. But like I said, next week, Monday, Tuesday, no classes, of course, due to Mardi Gras. So send me any questions you got about the study guide or one of my lectures or whatever. And that's it for this, of course, video. So y'all take care and have, like I said, good rest of the week.